My name is Lulanga Sydney. I'm a tutor for management theory and practice. The code for this course is MTP0S3. Management theory and practice talks about three major issues. It talks about management, theory and practice. These are managerial theories that have been tested over a period of time, and they have been found to be relevant and applicable in different environments. Now, there are a number of issues that we are going to look at in this course. There's the issue of history, the current and the future practices of management. Now, when we are talking about management, we mostly refer to Henry Fayol, who talks about the 5 functions of management. Most people keep 5, a number of people have reduced them to 4. And then the practices, these are applications that managerial skills, or when managerial skills are put into effect. These practices are supposed to help with understanding of the work environment, how to manage people, how to ensure that the organization does not make losses and makes profit. So we are going to look at a number of issues starting from the classic era to the modern times. So management theories and practice, it mostly looks at leadership in the organization, and it also looks at change. It ensures that the organization is led by correct people, in the competent people, efficient people are put into managerial positions, and these managers also their effect trickles down to the last person in the organization. Now, management and organization. On management and organization, we are mostly looking at the management philosophies and organizational forms that takes place over a period of time to meet the new needs. Now, needs, they change with a period of time depending on the focus of the organization, the demand from the market, the environment where the organization or an institution finds itself, the type of people that are available to provide services in that organization. So here we'll be looking at ideas and practices from the past, for example, that are still relevant today and applicable to management today, that could make the organizations remain relevant and effective. So when we are looking at a historical perspective, for example, we are looking at the context and the environment. We are trying to understand the societal impact on organizations today. Then we also try to bring in new thinking in the workplace today in order to improve our conceptual skills, conceptual understanding, our environment that the people find themselves in remain effective. So there are a number of factors that we'll look at here. Mostly we'll be looking at the social aspects or social forces, the impact of the political forces and the economic forces, how these have influenced organizations and continue to influence organizations, and possibly will continue influencing the organization and also the practices of management. Now, forces influencing organizations and management, those that we have mentioned, we talked about social forces, political forces, economic forces. Now, on social forces, we are mostly looking at values, needs, and standards of behavior in the organization. The issue of the employees realizing what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, the issue of morals, the issue of keeping up standards, and ensuring that the purpose for the organization is perpetuated, propagated, and encouraged. So here we are talking about the social values that are practiced in the organization. Sometimes these are enshrined in the company policies. Sometimes there's also the company traditions, where each member of the organization lives up to the expectations of the organization or the set rules. Now, political forces, mostly here we are talking about the political and legal institutions, the impact these institutions have on people and organizations. Now, when we are talking about economic forces, we are mostly talking about forces that affect the availability, productivity, and distribution of the society's resources among competing users. Here we are talking about issues to do with production, the output. How does the output justify the input? Are there any losses? Are there any gains? Is there profit? Issues like that. Now, management perspectives over time, as we have mentioned already, that will be looking at the classic up to the technology-driven workplace, which is our current situation. Now, management has undergone different changes over a period of time, and most of these have been put in different ways or different clusters, different time periods, and these time periods have been named accordingly, depending on the influential managerial or management theory applicable at that particular time. Now, these management theories applicable at different times are still applicable today, only that we are looking at the dominant issue or dominant management theory that is applicable today. For example, we can still use classical theories today in our management environment or in our organization, depending with the situation that we find ourselves in. So we need to use those theories for them to help us to understand or to find solutions to the situation that we find ourselves in. Now let's look at the classical perspective. Now, classical perspective happened well before, that was in the year 3000 BC, before Christ. Mostly this classical perspective looks at the rational scientific approach to management. It mostly focuses on organizations, trying to make organizations to be more efficient, and here organizations were mostly looked at as machines. Now, after classic perspective, there are a number of other time periods or management theories that came up, but we will not look at each and every one of them. We'll just look at scientific management. We'll also look at bureaucratic organizations, and then we'll also look at administrative principles. Now, scientific management is mostly associated with Frederick W. Taylor. Frederick Taylor brought about the scientific management. He looked at the work environment and realized that most of the employees were not performing because they were not competent. They didn't have the needed skills. So he thought of a way of making sure that the employees in the organization remain valuable, they add value to the organization, they have the needed competencies, they have the needed skills, they gain the needed experience that they would need over a period of time. So what he did was to develop a standard method of performing or for performing each job. So he talked about selecting employees with appropriate abilities for each job. Then he talked about training employees in a standard method where employees were able to do their work according to the instructions given to them. Then he also talked about supporting employees by planning work and eliminating interruptions. So for example, if a worker is given specific instructions, the worker should carry out those instructions accordingly, should be given all the tools and skills that the worker needs, and without asking the worker to do another job or giving contrary instructions to the instructions that were given. Then he also talks about when the workers perform accordingly, they should be remunerated accordingly. So he says that those employees who don't perform, they should be remunerated accordingly, in a way that they should not be remunerated like the one who is hardworking or following the instructions to the letter. So Frederick Taylor, the contributions of Frederick Taylor's thinking is that there was an issue of highlighting the importance of compensation for performance. Then also the careful study of tasks and jobs, and then the importance of personnel and their training. But the criticism of Frederick Taylor's thought is that it did not take note of the social context of work and the higher needs of workers. And also that Frederick Taylor did not acknowledge the differences that occur amongst the employees. A number of people look at Frederick Taylor as someone who did not regard employees with respect, saw them as uninformed, and totally ignored their opinion. So they say that Frederick Taylor, what he wanted was just employees who followed instructions and did what they were expected. Their opinion was not relevant to the workplace. On bureaucracy, bureaucracy organizations, we are mostly looking at Max Weber. Max Weber talks about bureau. Bureau literally comes from the French word, which talks about office. It looks at organizations. Now, before Max Weber's thoughts, or what prompted Max Weber to think about this, is the loyalty that the employees had developed towards individuals in organizations. So employees had more loyalty. They were listening to their supervisors more. They didn't associate themselves much with the organization. So it was found that when a manager, for example, resigned from the organization, most of the organizations would find it difficult to continue. So organizations were held at ransom by individuals. So Max Weber realized that this was not in line with what it was supposed to be. So he thought that the best way is to change this perspective, the attitude of the employees. Not to look at individuals, but to look at offices and to look at the organizations. The offices that people held were more important than the individual who occupied the office. So Max Weber thought that the best way was to use the resources to realize organizational goals, not really to use the resources to realize individual desires. So Max Weber thought that the best way to go about was to develop a method where organizations took prominence, and then he brought about different ideas to do with that bureaucracy. He talks about bureaucracy organizations, and he says that in these organizations there should be clear division of work with clear definitions of authority and responsibility. So each employee should know what they are expected to do, whom they report to. So the line or the channel of communication, the channel of power, the channel of responsibility should be clarified to each and every employee. Now, he also talks about personnel as being selected and promoted based on the technical qualifications. So people who are qualified should be given the responsibilities or offices that are applicable to their qualifications. He also talks about administrative acts and decisions recorded in writing. The interesting thing about Max Weber is the issue he talked about on management. He says that management should be separate from the owners. An owner can be a manager of the organization. He didn't dispute that. But when he's working as a manager of the organization, should be able to distance himself from that aspect of being an owner of the organization. So what is expected of a manager should be displayed by somebody occupying that position, whether he owns the organization or he does not own the organization. And the employees, they should relate to this person as a manager, not as a friend or a relative. And then he also talks about positions organized in the hierarchical manner of authority. So they should be the CEO, they should be general manager, they should be different divisional managers, and all these, they should have certain people who report to them. So he talks about people following protocol. He says that all this to be done, there was need for the organization to develop rules in the organization and procedures to ensure that there's what he called predictable behavior that is reliable and people are able to refer to it. Let's look at administrative principles. Now, administrative principles are most associated with Henry Fayol, whom we have alluded to, who talks about 5 functions of management and 14 principles of management. There is also Mary Parker and Chester I. Bernard. Now, the focus of administrative principles is mostly, again, they are just building on what Max Weber talks about, organization, not an individual. And for Henry Fayol, he says that managers, they should carry out mostly managerial functions. And he says managers should be able to plan. They should be able to organize their work. They should be able to command. They should be able to coordinate and be able to control. So those were key issues when it came to Henry Fayol. And then he talks about the 14 principles of management. He says that there should be clear division of labor in the organization. There should be a line of authority. There should be discipline. There should be unit of command, unit of direction, subordination of individual interest. So individual interest should not surface the organizational or group interest. And then he talks about remuneration. Employees should be remunerated accordingly. Then he also talks about centralization of authority or centralization of power. Then he talks about a chain, scalar chain, that the work that one employee does should be complemented by another work that another employee does. And then he talks about order in the organization, equity. Equity, that employees should be taken, their similarities and differences should be taken note of. Employees should be treated fairly but firmly. The authority, they should understand the line of command, they should understand their roles, and they should be able to participate accordingly. Then he also talks about stability and tenure of staff. So he says that it's important for an organization to maintain its staff and retain its workforce. Then he talks about initiative, that employees should be able to carry out certain initiatives, creativity, innovation. Employees should not always wait to be told what to do. Then he talks about esprit de corps, which literally talks about the welfare of the employees, hygiene, health, all those aspects that they need to be taken note of. So employees who need safety gear, for example, they should be taken should be taken note of. So Mary Parker Fowler, she talks about ethics, power, and empowerment. She also builds on the importance of the organization, but she says that it's important for an organization not to have so much conflict if it wants to be productive. She mostly talks about organizations working together, people in an organization working together, and then increasing the role of the social aspect of the employees. Because Mary Parker Fowler, she's mostly contrasting what Frederick Taylor is talking about in scientific management. The social aspect does not appear or appeal in scientific management, and Mary Parker is what she highlights. She also talks about that there are so many changes in the modern world, but employees remain key, and employees' happiness, leadership should be provided to the employees that they know, and we should be able to manage people. So she says that if there is good leadership in the organization, people's welfare is taken note of, the social aspect are considered, then the organization, that type of organization, will prosper more than the organization that emphasizes on engineering techniques. Now, what about Chester Bernard? Chester Bernard talks about the informal organizations, and he says within the organization there are different groups that are very influential, and these groups, they need to be taken note of because they can be used productively. So he talks about the organization taking note of the freedom of the employees, freedom to associate, and then realizing who is very influential in the organization, whether appointed formally or informally, and then using those channels to ensure that the employees follow the management orders. Humanistic perspective. Now, on humanistic perspective, we are mostly looking at the human behavior, the issues to do with behavioral sciences. In modern times, here we are talking about emotions or issues to do with needs, attitudes in the workplace. Emotional intelligence, when we are looking at human behavior, today it's mostly talking about emotional intelligence, it's talking about social intelligence, understanding our own emotions and being able to understand the emotions of other people, help ourselves and also help other people to help themselves, taking need of our own needs, or taking care of our own needs, and then helping to take care of the needs of other employees, and then having a correct attitude towards work, and also helping other employees have a correct attitude towards work. So humanistic perspective mostly propagates three major areas, which are to do with human relations, movements within the organizations, human resources, and then behavioral sciences approach. Human relations mostly talks about satisfying the employees' basic needs. And satisfying employees' basic needs, we can refer to Abraham Maslow, who talks about the hierarchy of needs. Remember, he talks about the physiological needs up to self-actualization. So we can refer to that. So the organization has an obligation to ensure that the employees' basic needs are taken care of in order for them to be more productive. Now, Hawthorne studies, these are mostly associated with Elton Mayo. There were studies that were carried over a period of time. It was 10 years study, and there were 4 experiments and 3 control groups. Now, what Elton Mayo wanted to establish is what difference do employees make in an organization, or what can make employees to be more productive in an organization. So there are 5 different tests that he carried out. And his focus, as we have mentioned, it was mostly to do with production or productivity. Some people have not accepted what the finding of Elton studies are, but his conclusion, to some extent, it's valid, because literally it means that a happy worker is the most productive worker. So his understanding is that money or any other factor, apart if it's not associated with the social aspect, relationships, association, happiness of employees, will not be as effective as the one that brings in the issue of human relations closer to it, and ensuring that employees are productive and happy. Now, human resource perspective mostly looks at jobs that they should be designed in such a way as to meet higher level needs in order for these employees to realize their full potential. And here we are mostly looking at Douglas McGregor. Douglas McGregor introduced the X and Y theory, and he puts employees in 2 categories. He says that the X theory are these employees who don't like work. They try to avoid work at all costs. They come to work, but they do not work. They need to be forced to work. They need to be coerced. They need to be controlled. They need to be threatened with punishment for them to perform. So here, Douglas McGregor does not talk of competencies or skills or experience. He says some of these employees have all this, but then they need to be forced to work because they belong to this group. So he says that these employees will avoid any kind of instruction. They will avoid any kind of responsibility. They have no ambition, but they want security. So they want the job, but they do not want to work. Now, he puts another group of employees into the Y category, which we call Y theory. He says that these employees, they like work. They are self-directed. They control themselves. You don't need to give them instructions. They take up some responsibility on their own, and then they are full of imagination, creativity, and these employees are there for themselves and for the organization. So these employees tend to be available, and if properly used, such employees can add a lot of value to the organization. Now, Douglas McGregor's thoughts, they are mostly complemented by William Ochi, who talks about the Z theory, where he combines the two, and he says that the employees need to associate themselves with the organization, and these employees who associate themselves with the organization, they tend to be more productive. William Ochi mostly bases his thoughts on Kaizen theory. Now, Douglas McGregor says that fewer companies, or companies that use theory X, they tend not to be very productive. And those that use theory Y, they tend to be very productive. Now, let's look at behavioral sciences approaches. Now, behavioral science approach mostly talks about social science, bringing social sciences in the organizational context. It looks at a number of areas. It looks at economics, it looks at psychology, it looks at sociology, it looks at anthropology and other disciplines, and brings these all disciplines in the area of work in order to try to understand how or why employees behave this way in such circumstances. And then it also tries to help organizations to understand the importance of interaction in the organizational setting. So behavioral sciences mostly help with organizational development. So an organization that really wants to improve from where it was before to be people-centered, employees being more productive, takes that science seriously. Now, management science perspective mostly developed after the Second World War. This management, with it looks at the issue about quantifying work. It brings in the issue of mathematics, statistics, and other quantitative techniques to managerial problems. It talks about issues, for example, operations research, that managers should carry out operations research using a mathematical model, that managers should operate at a certain level. Mostly here it brings in the issue of the physical production of goods and services. And then it also talks about information technology, which we find in most of the organizations bringing in what we call management information systems. Now, management science perspective does not seem to talk about the issue about the strategic level, which remains key when it comes to organizational performances. Now let's look at the recent historical trends. Recent historical trends, we have had systems theory, contingency view, and then total quality management. Systems view, here we are mostly looking at two major areas with the transformation process in between. Management or production technology, here we are talking about the organization creating a certain environment and ensuring that the inputs translate into outputs, and then if the output does not or meets the basic minimum or it makes profit, it's supposed to give feedback to the inputs in order to ensure that the inputs translate fully and well into output. So for example, if you have raw materials, for a number of raw materials, you should be able to tell how many products or services you should be able to provide. So the input areas, we are mostly looking at the raw materials, information resources, financial resources, human resources, and then on the other side, we are mostly looking at the employee satisfaction, profits and losses, products and services. And here we are saying that the environment should be able to be conducive for the organization or the workforce to produce accordingly. Then contingency view of management, there are two views here. One of them is where it says that one size fits all, which is a universality view. Okay, there's only one best way. Okay, and then there's another view which says that every situation is unique. Now, contingency view talks about the organizational phenomena existing in a certain logical pattern, logical manner, where managers devise and apply similar responses to common types of problems. And where there's a problem that is outside that sphere, managers need to find other solutions to such problems. So here we are talking about best practices and best fit. Okay, so we need to understand those two areas, best fit and best practice. So successful resolution of organizational problems is thought to depend on managers identifying or identification of key variations in the situation at hand. So that's where you apply different theories to try to find solutions to a particular problems. Now, elements of organization. There are three major elements in the learning organization. There's team-based structure, empowered employees on one side, and open information on another. Now, in this course, we looked at management theories and practices. We followed their origins from the classical era to the current era of technology. We have also realized that different thoughts have evolved over a period of time, and they have been applicable in different situations. Thank you.